The Warlord's herald cleared his throat for the third time, and Ghorza Thunderroar still had not looked up from her knife. She was seated on a low stone wall at the edge of Dustfall's central market square, turning the blade over in her broad green hands with the unhurried patience of someone who had been interrupted far too many times today to feel anything except tired irritation. The herald, a nervous little human with a purple sash denoting his master's house, clutched a scroll and sweated in the afternoon heat blowing off the high plains. "My mistress, the Lady Thunderroar," he tried again, his voice cracking slightly on the honorific. "Warlord Crag Ironjaw requests the honor of your— Tell Crag I ate his last gift horse," Ghorza said pleasantly, and finally looked up. She was not easy to ignore. She stood well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered and built like something the plains wind had shaped out of old iron, and yet the word that came to most people's minds when they first saw her was not imposing, though she was that too. The word was striking. Her dark green skin caught the sunlight like polished jade. Her tusks were short and well kept, the ivory of them edged faintly ivory gold. Her thick black hair was braided into 2 heavy ropes that fell over her shoulders, bound with copper wire and small white river stones. She wore fitted riding leathers dyed a deep oxblood red. A bodice laced tight across her torso with a row of brass rings, leather trousers that tucked into knee-high boots, and a single pauldron of cured boar hide on her left shoulder, bearing the burned insignia of Clan Thunderroar. The bodice was cut close, flattering the powerful lines of her figure, and the whole outfit was dusted from a week on the wagon road, which only made her look more dangerous. The herald blinked. The horse was a gift, not, "I know what it was." Ghorza sheathed the knife with a soft click. "A conversation piece, a way-in. Crag thinks if he sends something expensive enough I'll invite him to the table and we can negotiate my bloodline away over wine and flattery." She slid off the wall and stood to her full height, and the herald took a small involuntary step backward. "Go home. Tell him the answer is still no." The herald went. He went very quickly. Ghorza watched him scurry back through the dusty crowd of Dustfall's market day, and felt the tight thing behind her sternum that had been living there for the last 6 months pull a little tighter. She was the only daughter of Warlord Ghorza Thunderroar, who had died of a lung sickness 2 winters past, and since his death every clan commander and plains warlord from the Redstone Reaches to the Amber Coast had been sending messengers, gifts, and emissaries. They all wanted the same thing. Not her, her bloodline, her claim. Clan Thunderroar's 1,000 warriors, their grazing lands, their riverford trade rights. The Suitors had come in waves. Crag Ironjaw's heralds, then the sons of Warlord Vesa Coldtusk, then a full delegation from the Greymane Alliance. She had turned them all away. What she had not anticipated, when she'd packed her saddlebags and ridden south from the clan's highland territory to manage the clan's trade arrangements in Dustfall, was that the Suitors would follow her here. The trading post at the edge of the wagon road was supposed to be a reprieve. A few weeks of ordinary commerce, checking the accounts her father had kept with the grain merchants and tax sellers, renewing the road toll agreements, buying winter steel. Ordinary things. Things that belonged to a real life rather than a succession crisis. Instead, there were 3 warlord heralds camped in Dustfall, a rumor spreading through the market that she was here to choose a husband, and most recently and most alarmingly, a genuine witch hunt. She walked back through the market, keeping her head up and her expression flat. Dustfall was a hard-hewn little settlement, 50-odd buildings of yellow sandstone and rough timber along a wagon road that connected the coastal fishing towns in the east to the interior plains settlements in the west. The market square was its beating heart. Canvas stalls, braying pack animals, argument and coin, and the smell of spice and sweat. She had done business here a dozen times with her father and knew most of the merchants by name. But over the last week she had felt something shift in the town. There were new faces in the crowd, men in gray traveling cloaks who wore no visible insignia and asked questions at the tavern about strangers, about who had arrived recently, about whether anyone in town had been seen practicing the old arts. Purge-agents, her instincts told her. They had a smell about them like cold hearth ash. The Pale Council, which governed the string of coastal city-states to the east, had been sending them west for 3 months now, anyone deemed other, ungodly, dangerous. Hedge witches, bone readers. Greenkin traveling alone. She had not been stopped yet, but the gray cloaks watched her every time she crossed the square. She was passing the fishmonger's stall, a lean-to setup near the east edge of the market, smelling powerfully of salt and brine and fresh mackerel, when she nearly walked into a man carrying 2 enormous wicker crates of dried fish. "Sorry," he said immediately, the word out of his mouth before he had even finished catching his balance. He steadied the top crate with one forearm and stepped sideways to clear her path, and she stopped. He was not remarkable on the surface of it. A human man, maybe 30 or 31, weathered in the particular way of someone who had spent years facing salt wind rather than dry sun. His skin was deep brown and wind-burned at the cheekbones and the back of his neck, with faint pale lines at the corners of his dark gray eyes from years of squinting at open water. He was built lean rather than large, the kind of lean that came not from being small but from having worked hard enough and eaten inconsistently enough that there was no spare weight on him anywhere. His hands, she always noticed hands were remarkable, broad, rope-scarred with old calluses layered over old calluses across the palms and the base of each finger. Fisherman's hands. His clothes were plain, canvas trousers, a loose linen shirt the color of old cream pushed up to the elbows, a leather belt with a small knife and a folding scale. He wore no insignia, no house colors, no clan marks. Nothing on him said anyone at all. His eyes met hers without flinching. That was the first thing that struck her as unusual. Most people who looked up and found a 6-foot green-skinned orc woman looking back at them did something involuntary with their face. This man just looked at her, steady and unhurried, like she was a weather system he was assessing rather than something to be afraid of. "Are you all right?" he asked. "The corner of this crate, did it catch you?" "No," she said. "Good." He adjusted his grip and kept moving, sidestepping her neatly, and that was apparently all he had to say about it. She watched him go toward the fishmonger's stall. She did not know why she watched him. He was nobody. He had come from the coast with dried fish to sell, which was an entirely ordinary and unremarkable thing to do in a wagon road trading post. And yet there was something in the way he moved through the crowd that caught at her, not the purposeful swagger of men who wanted to be noticed, and not the hunched shuffle of men trying not to be seen. He just moved like he was exactly where he was and nowhere else, neither proud of it nor ashamed of it. She shook herself mentally and went back to her business. The account meeting with the grain merchant Dalva took most of the afternoon, and it went badly because Dalva's new partner, a slick young man from the coast with oiled hair and an accent that implied money, kept trying to renegotiate terms her father had set years ago. She kept the price where it was through sheer immovability, and by the time she walked out of Dalva's warehouse into the cooling evening air she was tired in the particular way that came from spending hours being patient when you did not feel patient. She stopped at the well in the center of the square to drink and found the fisherman there ahead of her, filling a battered tin cup. He glanced up. "Long day. You could tell. You came out of Dalva's warehouse looking like you'd been in a fist fight you weren't allowed to win." He offered her the cup. When she raised an eyebrow, it was his cup, and she was a stranger. He just held it steadier, still offering. She took it. The water was cold and tasted of iron and limestone, which was the taste of the high plains. She handed it back. "Fisherman," she said. He said. "Ezekiel Carver. I ran nets out of Port Ashen for 9 years. Sold the boat 8 months ago." He did not explain why. "You're Ghorza Thunderroar. The herald who left an hour ago was shouting your name at the tavern when I walked past." "Wonderful," she said flatly. He was also describing you in ways that suggested he'd never actually spoken to you before today. Ezekiel refilled the cup and drank from it himself. "I gathered the conversation didn't go his way." "None of them go their way." "How many of them are there?" 3 heralds currently, 2 more expected next week if the roads stay dry. She looked at him sideways. You are surprisingly easy to talk to for someone I nearly collided with 10 minutes ago. Something moved in his expression, not quite a smile, but close to it. I've found it's easier to just say what you mean, less wear on everyone. Most men say what they think you want to hear. I'm not most men, he said simply, and did not perform it. It was not a boast. It was a statement of fact delivered with the same tone he might use to say the water was cold. She found herself looking at him for a moment longer than she intended. Then the gray cloaks crossed the far side of the square in a pair, moving with that studied casualness that was not casual at all, and the moment dissolved. Purge-agents, she said quietly. He followed her gaze. His expression shifted, going careful and still. They've been through 3 towns east of here, he said. I passed through Millhaven 2 weeks ago. They had a bone reader locked in the garrison. Woman who'd done nothing but read pig knuckles for a livestock market. They had her up for questioning. He paused. I didn't stay to see how it ended. They're watching me, she said. I know. He said it without drama, which was oddly more alarming than if he'd been shocked. Greenkin traveling without a clan banner raises questions for people like that, especially here this far from the Highlands. She met his eyes. And yet you don't seem concerned about talking to me. Why would I be, he said. You haven't done anything wrong. She studied him. He returned the look without any apparent discomfort. She had spent 6 months watching men look at her, and seeing what they wanted through the window of their eyes: land, alliance, prestige, occasionally genuine desire, but desire shaped entirely by her utility as a prize rather than any real knowledge of her. This man's eyes showed something different. Simple curiosity, interest without agenda. It made her deeply suspicious. What did you come to Dustfall to sell? She asked. Salt cod and mackerel, dried and brined. I've been working the wagon road since I sold the boat, buying surplus from coastal catches and selling it inland where fresh fish is a luxury. He leaned against the well, coping. It keeps me in coin and moving. Why did you sell the boat? The small, almost smile again, this time a little sadder. Because the sea was getting lonely. He said it plainly, and then seemed to wonder if he'd said too much, and looked away toward the wagon road. There's a tavern called the Dusty Roan on the north side of the square. Better food than it looks from outside, if you haven't eaten. He pushed off the well and walked away, and Ghorza stood there with an empty tin cup in her hand, and the very distinct and inconvenient sensation of having just met someone she was going to keep thinking about. She ate at the Dusty Roan. He was already there at a corner table, and he looked up when she came in, and they ended up sharing the table because the place was full and there was nowhere else to sit. And they talked for 2 hours over roast fowl and flat bread and a clay jug of the bitter local beer. And by the end of it, she knew that he had grown up poor in a coastal fishing village, that he had worked boats since he was 16, that he had no family left to speak of, a mother gone when he was young, a father who had fished until his hands gave out, that he was 30 years old and quietly, practically lonely in the way of someone who had learned not to make too much of it. She told him more than she intended, about her father's death, about the succession pressure, about how she had ridden south to get 3 months of silence and found the Suitors had simply followed her, and how she was beginning to think there was nowhere she could go to be simply herself rather than a political object. Come to the coast sometime, he said. Port Ashen, people are too busy with the tide to care much about bloodlines. The Pale Council runs the coast, she said. He sobered. That's fair. She went back to her rented room above the saddler's shop that night and lay on her back staring at the rafters and thought about Ezekiel Carver, who had come to this town with nothing but dried fish and himself, and had somehow managed to be more honest with her in one evening than any man in the last 6 months. She was not supposed to be thinking about him. She was supposed to be concluding her clan's trade business and going home. She had duties. She had a clan that needed leadership, not their heir mooning over a fisherman in a dusty trading post. She told herself this firmly and then lay awake another hour anyway. In the morning there was a new complication, which was becoming the primary feature of her life. Warlord Crag Ironjaw had sent not just a herald but an emissary. His name was Brodek, a cousin of Crag's with heavy gold rings on every finger and the particular manner of a man who had never been told no by anyone he thought worth listening to. He arrived at the saddler's shop at dawn with 2 armored escorts and a written proposal, a formal offer of marriage, pressed and sealed, with terms including the absorption of Clan Thunderroar's fighting forces into Crag's alliance, and a clause that would place the combined clan's governance under Crag's council rather than any Thunderroar leadership. Ghorza read it standing in the street outside the saddler's, in the cold morning light, her breath misting faintly because the high plains nights were cold even in midsummer, and felt something move through her that was part fury and part grief and part a very cold and steady recognition. They would not stop. They would not stop because they had concluded, all of them, that she was alone and without leverage, and therefore sooner or later she would have to accept something. They were mathematically patient in the way of people who believe time is on their side. She handed the scroll back to Brodek without speaking. He blinked. "Lady Thunderroar, surely you know," she said. "Perhaps if you read the terms more carefully." "I read them," she said. "The answer is no. My Lord Crag is prepared to offer Brodek." She stepped closer, and he stepped back and bumped into one of his escorts, and she felt a grim satisfaction in that. "If Crag Ironjaw wants to speak with me, he can come himself. Without guards, without a written proposal, without a herald or an emissary. He can come and sit at a table with me and speak like one person to another. Until then I have nothing to say to anything with his seal on it." She turned back toward the door. "Lady Thunderroar," Brodek's voice had sharpened, "you should consider your position. Your clan is leaderless. You're traveling alone. You have no protected status in this town. The road south to your highland territory is 3 weeks' ride. If you continue to refuse these offers, you may find your options becoming very limited very quickly." She stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She let the silence sit for 3 seconds. Then she turned around. "Say that again," she said quietly. Brodek had enough sense to be afraid. He did not say it again. She went inside. Ezekiel was at the well when she crossed the square an hour later, because the well was apparently where he lived, or at least where she kept encountering him. He was talking to the fishmonger's boy about prices, a patient, measured negotiation that he wrapped up quickly when he saw her expression. "What happened?" he said. She told him. He listened without interruption, which was another thing she had noticed about him. He listened with actual attention, not the performative nodding of someone waiting for their turn to speak. "The threat at the end is new," he said when she had finished. "Yes. He's right that you have limited protection here. Dustfall has a garrison, but they're beholden to the road toll authority, not to any clan system." He thought for a moment. "How much of your clan business here is concluded?" 2/3. "I still need to renew the toll agreement with the Wagon Road Authority and settle a dispute about grazing right boundary markers on the North Range." "How long?" "A week if it goes smoothly. 2 if it doesn't." He nodded slowly. Then he said something she had not expected. "I'm here for at least that long. Maybe longer, depending on whether I can negotiate a regular supply route with Dalva's partner." He paused. "I'm not a fighter. I want to say that plainly. I'm not offering to be your sword arm. But I'm a free man with no affiliation to any warlord and no investment in your succession crisis. And I'm a decent amount harder to threat than a single woman traveling alone, simply because I don't have a claim anyone wants." He met her eyes. "2 people is harder to isolate than 1. She stared at him. "You're suggesting we travel in company." "I'm suggesting we eat our meals in the same place, cross the square at the same time, and give anyone watching the impression that you are not, in fact, alone." He shrugged, very lightly. "In exchange for not having to eat by myself anymore, which is an entirely selfish motivation." She was quiet for a moment. She knew what the clan would say back home, that the heir of Thunderroar traveling in company with a human fisherman with no name and no house was an embarrassment. She knew what Brodek would report to Crag, and what Crag would make of it. She knew that doing this would be complicated and possibly counterproductive in ways she could not fully predict. She said, "You'll want something in return." "Dinner company," he said, "which I already said." "That's all." He looked at her steadily. "That's all," she nodded. "All right, Carver, you have a bargain. It was not supposed to be anything. A practical arrangement between two people stranded in the same inconvenient situation with genuinely different problems that happened to have an overlapping solution. She had done more complex negotiations before breakfast. But things that are not supposed to be something have a way of becoming something anyway, when the people involved happen to fit together in ways neither of them entirely expected. The toll authority office was on the south side of town, a narrow building run by a man named Gret who had the energy of someone perpetually overwhelmed, and the expression of someone who had recently discovered that the person he owed money to was coming to collect. He was not inherently hostile to Ghorza, but he was nervous about her, and his nervousness made the negotiation slow and circuitous, and full of digressions into procedural history that were designed less to inform than to delay. Ezekiel came with her and sat in the corner with a folding scale and a ledger. He appeared to be doing his own accounts and said nothing for 40 minutes. When Gret tried for the fourth time to introduce a new clause that would reduce the Thunderroar toll right percentage by 8 points, Ezekiel looked up from his ledger and said, very mildly, "That clause would put you in breach of the original agreement of year 43, which I believe is still legally binding under the Road Authority's charter. The penalties for breach run to 3 times the disputed value plus arbitration costs." He went back to his ledger. Gret stared at him. "Who are you?" "He's with me," Ghorza said. Gret did not try the clause again. The toll agreement was renewed at the original terms by the end of the afternoon. Walking back across the square in the long amber light, Ghorza looked at Ezekiel sideways. "Where did you learn Road Authority charter law?" "I spent 9 years delivering fish to port customs offices," he said. "You learn which rules people are pretending don't exist." She laughed. It came out sudden and real, which surprised her, because she had not laughed not like that, not with actual warmth in a very long time. He looked at her when she laughed, and she caught it out of the corner of her eye, the way his expression changed. Something opened in it, something wondering and unguarded, like a man looking at a light he hadn't known was coming. She looked away and kept walking, but she was aware of him beside her with a new, uneasy brightness. That evening, one of the gray-cloaked purge-agents stopped her. She was alone. Ezekiel had gone to the stables to check on his wagon horse, and the agent stepped out from between 2 stalls as she was crossing the market at dusk. He was a lean man, 40 or so, with the flat eyes of someone who had professionalized suspicion into a reflex. "Your papers," he said. "I'm a free traveler," she said. "I don't require papers in a wagon road town." Greenkin traveling alone without clan declaration are required under the Pale Council's order of clarification to carry documentation of purpose and origin. "This is not Pale Council territory," she said evenly. "The Pale Council's purview extends to all wagon roads east of the Ashridge," he said, "which includes Dustfall. Your name and your business here, please." She held his gaze. She knew better than to lose her temper with these men. She had heard enough stories. They were looking for a reason, always looking for a reason, and a greenkin woman who showed aggression was the easiest reason in the world to find. "Ghorza Thunderroar," she said, "heir of Clan Thunderroar. I'm here on legitimate trade business, renewing road agreements on behalf of my clan. Documentation of clan standing. My clan does not issue paper documents. Our agreements are witnessed and recorded by the Road Authority. Speak to Gret." The agent studied her with the methodical patience of someone who was not personally angry but who had been given a mandate and was executing it. "We've had reports of bone work in this market over the last week. Old arts. Blood trading. Greenkin have been known to—" "I am not a practitioner of anything," she said, very precisely. "I am a clan heir managing trade accounts. I have done nothing to warrant your attention." "That is for me to determine," he said. "You'll come to the garrison for questioning." "No," she said, "I will not. The second agent materialized from her right. She had not heard him approach, which told her something about their training. The first one reached for her arm. What happened next happened very fast. "She's with me." Ezekiel had come back from the stables by a different route than she had expected, and he was standing 6 feet away with his arms loose at his sides and his voice exactly level, not loud, not aggressive, just completely certain. The agent stopped with his hand in the air. "Sir," the agent said, "this individual is under she's with me," Ezekiel said again. He walked forward slowly until he was standing at Ghorza's side, close enough that their arms almost touched, and he looked at the agent with the same unhurried assessment he seemed to turn on everything. "My name is Ezekiel Carver. I'm registered with the Coastal Trade Authority out of Port Ashen, license number 417, Coastal Merchant Charter. She's traveling under my charter as a trade representative. I'm happy to produce the documentation." He reached into his shirt and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out, and the agent took it and examined it, and Ghorza saw the agent's expression shift through several small stages of recalculation. The paper was a coastal merchant charter. She did not know if it actually said what he had claimed it said, but the agent read it twice and then handed it back. "This charter covers coastal goods only," the agent said, though his tone had changed. "It covers trade representatives operating on behalf of a chartered merchant, which she is," Ezekiel said. "If you'd like to take this up with the trade authority, I'm happy to arrange an arbitration. It usually takes about 3 weeks and involves a good deal of writing." He paused. "Or we can go about our evening." The agent looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Ghorza. Then he stepped back. They walked away. Ghorza matched Ezekiel's unhurried pace until they had turned a corner and put a building between themselves and the agents, and then she stopped. "That paper," she said. "Genuine coastal merchant charter," he said. "It covers what I said it covers, more or less, if you read the regulations charitably. More or less. More than less." He looked at her. "Are you all right?" "I am." She stopped. The tight thing behind her sternum was doing something unfamiliar, which was loosening just slightly around the edges. "I am fine. You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "You could have walked the other way." "I could have," he agreed. She looked at him in the falling dark, at the plain fact of him, this man who kept appearing at precisely the moments when she needed someone to appear and doing precisely the right thing without performing it. "Carver," she said, "what do you want from this?" He was quiet for a moment, in the way she had come to recognize as his actual thinking rather than his buying-time silence. "I want to keep talking to you," he said simply. "That's all I've ever wanted from it." She held that. "That is a dangerously simple answer," she said finally. "I know," he said. "I mean it anyway." The next morning brought Brodek back with a new proposal, and this one had teeth. He had gone to the gray-cloaked agents. She could see it in his face, the smug, satisfied calculation of a man who has found a lever. He stood outside the dusty roan in the early morning while she was finishing breakfast, and he said, with Ezekiel 3 feet away and apparently absorbed in a bread roll, "Lady Thunderroar, we have discovered that the Pale Council's purge order extends to non-human travelers in Wagon Road territories who cannot demonstrate active clan protection or house affiliation. You are, at present, technically unprotected. However, if you were to be formally attached to Warlord Crag's household, even in an informal capacity pending formal arrangement, you would fall under his clan's protections and be beyond the Council's reach." She understood the shape of it immediately. Agree to Crag's terms and he would use his clan's political weight with the Pale Council to protect her. Refuse, and she was theoretically subject to the Purge Authority, alone and far from her own territory with no one to intervene. She also understood that she was being backed into a corner, carefully and methodically, and that Brodek expected her to recognize this and capitulate. "What a remarkable coincidence," she said quietly, "that the Purge Authority's interest in me has intensified just as you arrived with your master's proposal." Brodek said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She stood. She was taller than Brodek by 8 inches and she used it, not aggressively, but with the calm consciousness of someone who knows the weight of what they carry. Tell Crag that I am aware of the nature of this arrangement. Tell him that I find it instructive about his character. And tell him that my answer remains no. Brodek's mouth tightened. Lady Thunderroar, I am done receiving his messages, she said. Good morning, Brodek. She sat back down. Ezekiel ate his bread roll. When Brodek had gone, he said, without looking up, he'll escalate. Yes. What do you want to do about it? She looked at him. He was asking her, not offering a plan, not assuming she needed to be rescued, but asking what she wanted to do, as though her determination of the direction was the obvious starting point. She was not used to that. I need 3 more days to finish the boundary dispute on the North Range, she said. If I can get that settled, I can leave. Ride north. Get back inside Thunderroar territory where the Council has no reach. 3 days, he said. I can go with you to the boundary negotiation if it helps. The terrain knowledge I have is coastal, which is useless, but he paused. I can be a body in the room. A body in the room, she repeated. A witness, he said. Someone watching. She studied him. Carver, the wager we made was dinner company. You are considerably exceeding those terms. He finally looked up. His gray eyes in the morning light were very steady. I suppose I am, he said. She wanted to ask him why. She did not ask. She was afraid of what he would say, and more afraid of what she would feel when he said it. The boundary dispute took 2 days instead of 3, because she drove it with a ferocity that startled the range manager and his counterpart from the neighboring Goldthorn clan. And Ezekiel sat in the corner of the range authority's dusty office with his arms folded and his expression thoughtful, and said nothing except once. When the Goldthorn representative tried to cite a survey map that she recognized as being from 15 years ago, and therefore predating the river course change that had shifted the natural boundary marker, Ezekiel said, quietly, that survey doesn't account for the copy-run flood of year 48. There's a revised survey on file with the road authority. Page 9, I believe. There was. She had not known he had looked it up. The boundary dispute resolved in Thunderroar's favor. They were walking back from the range authority office in the late afternoon sun when she stopped in the middle of the road and turned to face him. Ezekiel, she said. He stopped and looked at her. Why are you doing this? She asked. The real reason, not dinner company. You are spending your days helping me conduct clan business in a town where purge-agents are watching both of us. What is actually in this for you? He was quiet for a moment. The wind moved across the high plains, lifting a haze of red dust from the road surface, and somewhere behind them in the market square, a horse was complaining loudly about something. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him decide, with visible deliberateness, to say the true thing rather than the safe thing. I have been alone for 3 years, he said. Not dramatically alone, not noticeably alone, just alone the way you can be when you're moving from town to town and talking to people every day, but none of it connects to anything. Selling fish, making coin, moving on. He looked at his hands for a moment. And then I nearly walked into you with a crate of dried mackerel, and you looked at me without any of the usual things people do when they look at me, and you talked to me like a person talks to another person, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. He looked up. That's the real reason. It's embarrassing and it's true, and I thought you deserved to know it. She looked at him for a long time. I have had men try to claim me, she said. Men who sent gifts before they knew my name. Men who offered alliances and called them affection. Men who saw my bloodline and made it into a woman. She paused. You know nothing about my bloodline except that it's causing me trouble. And you keep showing up anyway. I keep showing up anyway, he agreed quietly. She stepped forward and kissed him. It was not tentative. She was not a woman who did tentative. She took his face in her broad hands. Those hands that had been the first thing she noticed about him were now being noticed by him. She could feel his breath catch, and kissed him with the full weight of 6 months of loneliness, and 6 months of being treated as a commodity, and the very specific and overwhelming relief of someone who has finally found a thing they did not know they were looking for. He kissed her back after one stunned moment, both hands coming up to her arms, and she felt the genuine realness of it, the warmth, the being held by someone who wanted to hold her rather than hold her down. When she pulled back, they were both breathing slightly faster than usual. That, she said, was probably unwise. Probably, he agreed. He was smiling now, the first real full smile she had seen from him, and it changed his face entirely, made him look younger and lighter, like something had been set down. "We have a problem," she said, not stepping back. "The agents," he said. "And Brodek," she said. "And the fact that I leave in 2 days." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "Where will you go when Dustfall is done?" He held her gaze. "Where are you going?" "North, Thunderroar territory." "I don't know anything about the North," he said. "No," she agreed. "I've never traded inland that far." "No," she agreed. He looked at her steadily. "There's nothing stopping me," he said. She felt something enormous move through her. Not the tight thing this time, something the opposite of it. "Carver," she said carefully. "I know what I'm saying," he said quietly. "I've thought about little else for a week." She let out a slow breath. The sun was going down behind the high plains, and the sky was going the extraordinary color it went in this part of the world, deep orange fading into green, fading into the first cold blue of night. And she stood in the dusty road with this man who had come to this town with nothing but himself, and felt, for the first time in a long time, that she was not managing her situation alone. "We still have 2 days," she said, "and Brodek is going to make them complicated." "Then we deal with Brodek," he said, "and then we go north." Brodek made the next day complicated in a way neither of them had anticipated. He had not gone to the gray-cloaked agents directly. He had done something cleverer, which was to speak to several of the market traders and plant a very specific rumor that Ghorza Thunderroar was here not on legitimate trade business, but as an agent of the Highland clans conducting a survey for a planned raid on the Wagon Road. The rumor spread through the market in the way only dangerous rumors can, feeding on existing anxiety about the purge, about the clans, about the uneasy relationship between the plains settlements and the Highland orcs, and by mid-morning the atmosphere in the square had changed. She felt it the moment she stepped out. The looks. Not the usual uncomfortable interest of people who didn't know what to do with a greenkin woman in their market. These were harder, colder looks, with the particular quality of collective suspicion beginning to form into collective purpose. She was at the spice merchant's stall when it broke. A man heavyset, red-faced, one of the local livestock traders, raised his voice from 15 feet away. "Thunderroar, we know why you're here. You're counting our supplies, running numbers for a raid." She turned to face him. "No," she said. 3 Thunderroar raids in 5 years on the North Road," the man said. "My brother lost his entire winter supply train to a Highland raid 2 years back. We don't want your kind here doing what you're calling trade business." A crowd was forming. This was the thing about Brodek's method. It was efficient. He did not need to act himself. He just needed to light the fire. "I am here," she said, keeping her voice level and clear, "to renew trade agreements that my father made with this market. I have documentation. Speak to Gret. Speak to the range authority. Every piece of business I have conducted here has been legal, witnessed, and in good faith." "That's what a spy would say," someone in the crowd said, and the murmur that went through the watching people had a dark character. She was calculating very quickly. She was armed, she always wore her knife. But this was a crowd, and a knife was not a solution to a crowd, and she would not make herself the story they had already been told to expect. She stood absolutely still, hands visible, voice steady, and did not let any of the very genuine alarm she was feeling surface on her face. And then one of the gray-cloaked agents was there, pushing through the crowd from the east side. "The individual is currently under review by the Pale Council's Purge Authority," he announced, loudly enough for the whole crowd to hear. "She will come with us for documentation." She felt the crowd shift. The livestock trader's expression went satisfied. "She will come with me," said Ezekiel. He had come out of nowhere. No, she tracked it. He had been at the grain merchant's, which was at the north end of the square, and he had crossed it fast when he heard the noise. and now he was standing in the gap between her and the gray-cloaked agent with his hands at his sides, and his voice carrying the same calm certainty she had come to recognize as his particular brand of courage. "Sir," the agent said, "this individual is coming with me," he said. He was not reaching for anything, no weapon, nothing threatening, just standing between her and the agent with the steady physical fact of himself. "She is my contracted trade representative, documented under Port Ashen Merchant Charter 417, and if you want to detain her you will need to produce a specific charge under the Pale Council's order, not a general review. A specific charge with evidence. Do you have one?" The agent looked at him. The crowd watched. In the watching was the particular quality of a group of people who have not yet decided which way they want this to go. "The review," the agent began, "is not a charge," Ezekiel said. "I know the difference. So does the road authority. So does the Trade Charter Board in Port Ashen, who I will be writing to this afternoon if this continues." He paused. "A specific charge with evidence, or we're going to the Road Authority office together right now, and you can explain to Gret on the record why you believe a documented clan heir conducting legitimate trade business is subject to purge review under the Council's order, which, I'll remind you, has not been ratified by the Wagon Road Authority, who has independent jurisdiction." The agent was silent for a long, charged moment. The crowd was very quiet. Ghorza watched Ezekiel stand there in the middle of the square with the whole town watching, and no weapon and no backing and no house colors and no name anyone here would recognize, just himself, steady as a post in a storm, and she felt something break open in her chest in a way she had no words for yet. The agent stepped back. The crowd dispersed. Brodek was nowhere to be seen. He had vanished when the confrontation had not gone the way he planned. The livestock trader muttered something and walked away. Ezekiel turned to her. His jaw was tight in a way that told her the apparent calm had been costing him something. "You're all right," he said. "I'm all right," she said. She looked at him. "Ezekiel." He met her eyes. "Thank you," she said, and meant it in several directions at once. That night at the Dusty Roan was different. There was a quality to the air between them that had been building for days and had now reached a kind of critical mass, where even simple things, the way he passed her the bread, the way she refilled his cup without asking, felt weighted with the additional meaning of two people who had stopped pretending to themselves. She told him about her father. Not the political father, not the warlord whose death had created the succession crisis, but the actual man. The one who had taught her to track through Highland snow, who had told her when she was 12 that she was going to be formidable, who had said the last time she saw him alive that she should choose her own life, and not let anyone choose it for her. She had not talked about him to anyone since his death, because talking about it made it real in the worst way. Ezekiel listened. He asked about what her father had been like on ordinary days, not what he had achieved, what he had been like, and she found herself describing a man she had loved very much, and the telling of it was painful and also, unexpectedly, a relief. He told her about his last night on the sea. He had gone out alone on the boat the night before he sold it, he said, anchored in a bay he had known his whole life, and sat on the deck and tried to figure out whether he was making the right decision. He was selling the thing that had defined him, and had nothing clear to replace it with. He had sat out there until dawn and come to no particular conclusion except that staying was no longer possible and forward was the only direction. "I think I was looking for something without knowing what it was," he said. She looked at him across the table, and, the small smile, slow and real, "and I found a clan heir in a dusty trading post with 3 warlords' heralds chasing her and purge-agents taking notes." "You have terrible luck," she said. "I'm starting to revise that assessment," he said. She reached across the table and took his hand. His big, rope-scarred, calloused fisherman's hand, and held it, and he turned it over and held hers back, and they sat like that for a long time while the tavern moved around them, and neither of them had anything more pressing to do than stay exactly where they were. Brodek's final move came the next morning, and it was worse than she had expected. She woke before dawn to the sound of something happening in the street below the saddler's shop. Voices, movement, the particular quality of organized activity in the dark. She was at the window before she was fully awake, and what she saw in the first gray light made her blood go cold. There were 6 men in the street. 3 of them were Brodak's escorts armored, 2 were gray-cloaked agents, and one of them was holding Ezekiel. They had taken him from his room at the Dusty Roan. He was not restrained violently. They had him by the arms, not roughly, more like a formal custody situation, but his face in the early light was very still in the way of someone making a calculation. She dressed in 30 seconds, knife at her belt, down the stairs and out the door before the saddler's household was awake. She came out into the street and all 6 men looked at her. Brodak stepped out from behind the armored escorts. In the gray morning light he looked very satisfied. "Lady Thunderroar," he said, "I thought we should have a final conversation." "Let him go," she said. "Mr. Carver is not under arrest," Brodak said smoothly. "He is simply being held as a material witness while we conclude some documentation." "Let him go," she said. "The Pale Council's agents have found a discrepancy in his merchant charter," Brodak said. "It may require some extended review, days, perhaps weeks. Of course, if certain matters were resolved between Warlord Crag and yourself, I'm sure these administrative concerns could be—" "Ghorza," Ezekiel said. His voice was level. He was not afraid, or if he was, he had put it where it could not be seen. He looked at her across the 6 feet of dusty street between them and said calmly, "Don't." She looked at him. "Don't do anything they're asking," he said. "This is what they do. They find the thing you can't bear to risk and they hold it up in front of you. Don't let it work." "You are the thing I can't bear to risk," she said, and she said it plainly in front of all of them, not caring who heard. He held her gaze. Something moved through his expression, the same opening she had seen before, but wider. "I know," he said quietly. "I know, but don't." She looked at Brodak. She looked at the 2 gray agents. She looked at the 3 armed escorts. She did the calculation. She could not fight 6 men, not without serious injury to Ezekiel in the process. Physical action was not the answer here. What she had was her voice and her name. She drew herself up to her full height and she spoke, loudly and clearly, in a voice that carried across the square and into the early morning stalls where traders were beginning to set up for the day. "My name is Ghorza Thunderroar, heir of Clan Thunderroar, recognized authority under the Highland Clan Charter. I am hereby invoking clan protection over Ezekiel Carver, a free man and my contracted associate, under the Treaty of Road Rights signed between Clan Thunderroar and the Wagon Road Authority in year 43. She let that land, and then kept going. I'm also informing everyone currently present and everyone in earshot that the emissary Brodak, acting for Warlord Crag Ironjaw, has conspired with agents of the Pale Council to detain an innocent man as leverage in a political negotiation, which is a violation of the Road Authority's charter against coerced commercial agreements and a personal breach of honor by a named warlord. She looked at the gray-cloaked agents. If you are genuine agents of the Pale Council, you are being used by a warlord for personal gain and are currently in breach of your own mandate. If you release him now, I will not file a formal complaint with the Council's Oversight Office in Port Ashen. If you do not, I will, in detail. The square was very quiet. Brodak's satisfied expression had curdled. One of the agents looked at the other. Something passed between them that was the visual equivalent of 2 people realizing they have been put in an untenable position. "Release him," the senior agent said to the escorts. They let go of Ezekiel. He took 1 step forward, straightening his shirt, and did not look at Brodak, just walked directly to Ghorza across the street and stopped at her side. Brodak said, with the last of his composure, "Lady Thunderroar, Warlord Crag will hear of." "Good," she said. "Tell him everything. Tell him about the charter violation. Tell him about using the Council's agents as private muscle. Tell him that Ghorza Thunderroar will be raising the matter with the Highland Council and the Road Authority, and that she will be happy to explain exactly how this week unfolded to any neutral party who wishes to arbitrate." She held his gaze. "Tell him that, all of it." Brodek left. He left with the particular tight-shouldered walk of a man who is already revising his story. The gray agents dissolved into the morning. The watching traders went back to their stalls, though she could hear the low hum of conversation that would become the market's talk for days. Ezekiel exhaled slowly. She turned to look at him and found him looking at her with an expression she could not entirely categorize. It was awe, she thought, and something deeper than awe. "The clan protection clause," he said. "Is that real?" "It is," she said. "It applies to contracted associates traveling under the clan's trade arrangements." She paused. "You became one when you started showing up to my negotiations." "Did I?" He was almost smiling. "Retroactively," she said. He laughed, a short, real sound, then he looked at her seriously. "You named me in public, in front of Brodek, as someone under your protection." "Yes," she said. "That's going to travel," he said. "Word of that will reach Crag and every other warlord with a suitor in the field. They'll know that I have made a choice about my company," she said steadily. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure?" She stepped toward him and took his face in her hands, very deliberately, in the middle of the empty morning square, with the dawn light going gold over the buildings. And she said, "I am very sure." He kissed her this time, without the earlier hesitation, his hands coming up to her arms and pulling her in with quiet certainty, and it was nothing like the desperate, half-frightened hunger of their first kiss the evening before. It was something more grounded and more enormous at the same time. A beginning rather than a release. When they separated, she said, "We leave today." "Yes," he said. "The wagon rode north." "I'll get the horse," he said. They left Dustfall in the early afternoon, when the sun was high and the dust plume from the wagon road was visible for miles. Ghorza rode her mare and Ezekiel drove his trade wagon, which was battered and practical and smelled permanently of dried fish, and they rode north together out of the trading post with the whole market square watching them go. The road north wound out of the flat market town terrain into increasingly dramatic country, red rock formations, deep-cut dry riverbeds, and then, as the days passed, the gradual rise toward the highland plateaus where the air was thinner and colder, and the sky was enormous. The grass changed from the pale stubble of the plains to the thick green-black of highland meadows. The evenings got cold faster, and they made camp with a fire, and the fire was warm, and they sat close enough that warmth was not the only reason. They talked more on that road than she had talked to anyone in years. He told her about fishing, not the labor of it but the specific experience of being on open water, the way weather looked different from the deck of a boat than from any land-bound position, the way the sea had a logic all its own. She told him about the Highland clans, not the politics of them but the actual texture of that life, the training, the ceremonies, the specific tradition of Clan Thunderroar in which the heir was expected to win their position through demonstrated capability rather than birth order, and that this meant she had spent her adolescence in a sustained state of having to prove herself, every day. To people who were perfectly willing to respect her if she earned it but who would not give her an inch she hadn't paid for. "Does it bother you?" he asked one evening watching the fire, having had to work for it every day. "No," she said, and meant it. "It means when they follow me, they've chosen to. Not because of whose daughter I am." He was quiet for a moment. "That's what you want from a person, isn't it?" he said. "Not because of what you represent, because of who you are." She looked at him across the fire. He was looking into the flames with his gray eyes very still, and she knew he was not just talking about her. "Yes," she said softly, "that is what I want." He looked up and met her eyes. They were 3 days north of Dustfall, camped in a meadow at the edge of the Highland Plateau, when the first of the Thunderroar scouts found them. 2 riders came down from the ridge above the meadow at dusk, large orcs in the distinctive banded leather of the clan's outriders, their mounts the heavy-boned Highland horses the clan bred for mountain terrain. They pulled up 10 feet from the camp and looked at Ghorza, and then at Ezekiel, and then back at Ghorza, with the particular measuring expression of people trying to understand what they are seeing. "Kira," Ghorza said, recognizing the lead rider, who was a woman she had trained with since childhood. "Well met, well met," Kira said carefully, looking at Ezekiel again. "We've been watching the South Road for 3 days. There were reports of trouble in Dustfall." "There was trouble in Dustfall," Ghorza said. "It resolved." She met Kira's eyes steadily. "Ezekiel Carver, he travels with me." Kira's expression said several things without saying any of them aloud. "The council will want to see you," she said finally. "There's been a lot of incoming correspondence about—" "I know what the correspondence has been about," Ghorza said. "I'll speak to the council, but Ezekiel comes with me. He is under my protection." Kira looked at Ezekiel one more time. He met her gaze with his usual unconcerned steadiness, as though being assessed by Highland orc outriders on a mountain plateau was simply another thing that was happening in the world and he was present for it. Kira looked back at Ghorza. Whatever she saw in Ghorza's face settled the question. "We'll ride in the morning," she said. The Thunderroar stronghold was not what Ezekiel had expected, she could tell. It was not a single castle or compound, but a network of stone buildings set into the ridgeline of the high plateau walls that grew organically from the rock, towers that had been here for 300 years, lower buildings added in stages by each generation of the clan, connected by covered walkways and open courtyards. The whole thing was weathered and functional and old, and it smelled like stone and wood smoke and horses, and it was her home in a way that the word home meant something profound rather than just a location. She watched Ezekiel look at it as they rode through the main gate, and she saw in his expression not intimidation, but wonder. The honest wonder of someone encountering something larger and older than their previous experience and finding it magnificent rather than threatening. "Your family built this," he said. "Over 300 years," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "It's extraordinary," he said simply. She introduced him to the clan members they encountered in the courtyard with the same simple phrase she had used to Kira: "He travels with me." She watched the calculation happen in each set of eyes, the surprise, the assessment, the eventual decision to reserve judgment. They were not hostile. They were her clan, and she was the heir, and if she said he traveled with her, he traveled with her. But she could see the questions forming, and she knew they would not wait long. The council met the following morning. 9 senior clan members, seated in a semicircle in the great stone hall where decisions had been made for 3 centuries, and Ghorza standing at the center and the question in the air as heavy as the old timber overhead. She told them everything: the trade business in Dustfall, the Suitors' heralds, Brodach and Crag's proposal, the purge-agents, the public confrontation. She told it clearly and without softening, including the detail about invoking clan protection over Ezekiel Carver. Several faces shifted at that. She let them. When she had finished, the council's eldest member, a man named Ghorza who had served her father for 40 years, said, "The Suitors will not stop. Crag will be angry. The Pale Council agents will report back." He paused. "Lady Thunderroar, what is your intention with regard to the clan's succession?" "To lead it myself," she said, "as my father intended, without marriage as a political transaction." "The clan needs stability," another council member said. "The other warlords see us as vulnerable without your father. If you continue to refuse every offer, then I refuse them," she said. "We are not vulnerable. I am here. I will lead. And I will not be married off to someone who sees this," she gestured to the hall, "to everything it represented as a prize to be acquired." Ghorza looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked toward the door, and she understood that he was thinking about Ezekiel, who was waiting in a guest room in the east wing. "The human man," Ghorza said carefully. "You invoked clan protection over him." "He stood in front of me when the agents were closing in," she said. "He put himself between me and 3 warlords' guards when he had no obligation to and nothing to gain by it. He helped me conduct 3 weeks of trade negotiations in a hostile environment. He came north." She held Ghorza's gaze. "He came north with nothing but himself, and because I asked him to. That is more than anyone with a fleet of heralds and a written proposal has offered me." Ghorza was quiet for a long time. "What do you want from us, Lady Thunderroar?" he said finally. She took a breath. I want the Council's recognition that the trade agreements I concluded in Dustfall are valid and binding. I want a formal communication to Warlord Crag that his emissary violated Road Authority Charter, and that we expect a formal apology. I want a correspondence sent to the other warlords, Vesa Coldtusk, the Greyman Alliance, saying that the Heir of Thunderroar is not entertaining arranged proposals, and that continued pressure on this point will be treated as an act of bad faith. She paused. And I want Ezekiel Carver given the same rite of passage and guest status in Thunderroar territory that we extend to any contracted clan associate. Gorek looked at the other 8 council members. The look that went around the semicircle had the quality of a very long conversation happening very quickly between people who have been working together for years. The trade agreements will be ratified, Gorek said. The communications will be sent. The guest status is approved. He paused once more. Lady Thunderroar, your father told me once that the thing he most wanted for you was someone who would see you clearly. He was specific about that, clearly. I remember, she said. I think, Gorek said carefully, that he would not be displeased. She did not allow herself to react in the council chamber. She kept her face composed and her voice steady and thanked the council and withdrew. She walked through the covered walkway and through the east courtyard and up the stone stairs to the east wing and knocked on the guest room door with her knuckles. Come in, said Ezekiel. He was sitting at the room's narrow window looking out over the plateau, and he turned when she came in. He had the expression of a man who has been doing his waiting well and is relieved to no longer be waiting. The room was small and plain stone walls, a rope bed, a table, a ewer of water, and he looked at home in it in the way he seemed to look at home everywhere he was, because he did not require particular circumstances to be himself. How did it go? He said. The council ratified the trade agreements, she said. Crag is getting a letter. The other suitors are getting letters. You have clan guest status and rite of passage in Thunderroar territory. He was quiet for a moment. And what does that mean, clan guest status? She looked at him. It means you are protected here. It means the clan recognizes your presence as sanctioned. It means she stopped. She was doing the thing she did when she was uncomfortable, which was becoming very precise and administrative. She stopped herself doing it and said instead, it means that if you choose to stay, you are welcome here. The word stay sat in the air between them. He looked at her. He had the habit, she had come to love it, of being very still when something important was happening, not checking for exits or buying time, just being fully present with the thing. What would that look like? He said. Staying. Practically, I don't know, she said honestly. I've never asked anyone to stay before. You're asking now, he said. I'm asking now. He was quiet for another moment. His gray eyes moved from her face to the window and the vast highland plateau beyond it, and she held still and did not fill the silence because she had learned that he needed the silence to be honest in. I have a wagon of dried fish downstairs, he said. No family, no home I've been missing. No obligation pulling me anywhere specific. He looked back at her. And I am in love with you, which is the most relevant thing I have to say about this. She crossed the room in 3 steps. He stood when she moved toward him, because he always did that, this small unconscious gesture of attention that she had noticed from the first and found endlessly disarming. She put her hands on his face, the way she had in Dustfall, the way she intended to keep doing for as long as he let her, and looked at him from very close. I am in love with you too, she said. I have been since you stood in front of me in a market square with nothing between you and 6 armed men except your own stubbornness. It worked, he said. It worked, she agreed. She kissed him, and the kiss was not tentative or desperate or a negotiation. It was simply the way 2 people come together when they have stopped pretending the distance between them makes sense. His arms came around her, and she felt the solidity of him, this man who was not the largest or the strongest or the most powerful person she had known, but who was unfailingly, remarkably present. And that presence had turned out to matter to her in a way nothing tactical or political ever had. The fire in the room's small hearth was low, and the highland evening was coming in cold through the window, and she leaned her forehead against his for a moment. "Crag is going to be angry," she said. "Let him be angry," he said quietly. "The other warlords will try again eventually." "They can try," he said. "You'll deal with it. You're very good at dealing with it." She laughed against his mouth. He smiled, and she could feel the smile, and she kissed him again slowly, while the fire crackled and the plateau wind moved against the old stone walls of her home. The formal reckoning with Crag Ironjaw came 6 weeks later, not as an armed confrontation but as something almost stranger, a delegation. He sent it with 4 senior clan members, which was an acknowledgement of serious intent, and a written request for mediated negotiation under the Highland Council's arbitration process. He did not come himself. She had told Brodach that if he wanted to speak with her, he should come himself, and he had not, which told her something useful about the limits of his seriousness. She received the delegation in the great hall with Ghorza at her right and 3 council members at her left and Ezekiel present, not at the official council positions, because that was not his role and she was not going to force him into a position he hadn't asked for, but seated along the wall as an acknowledged associate, which was precisely what he was. Crag's delegates presented their grievances and their revised proposal, which was softer than the original no-absorption clause, joint governance language rather than outright subordination. She listened to all of it carefully. She asked precise questions. She took 2 hours and recessed for the night and came back in the morning with a counter. Thunderroar would enter a non-aggression treaty with Crag's alliance and would grant road passage rights to his trade caravans, in exchange for a formal apology for Brodach's conduct in Dustfall, a permanent withdrawal of all arranged marriage proposals, and a public acknowledgement that the heir of Thunderroar held full and independent authority over her clan's governance. The delegation conferred for half a day. They accepted. She sat in the great hall afterward, in the quiet after everyone had gone, and she felt the succession crisis, the thing that had been pressing on her for 6 months like a physical weight shift, and lighten into something she could actually manage rather than something that was managing her. Not gone. The plains were still the plains and warlords were still warlords, and she was still the only heir of a significant clan. But the immediate threat of being backed into a corner had been removed, and the precedent had been set, and she had set it herself. Ezekiel came and sat beside her. He did not say anything immediately. He brought her a cup of the hot spiced drink the clan made from Highland root and pepper, which she had introduced him to 2 weeks ago, and which he had decided he was going to drink every day for the rest of his life, and he sat beside her with his own cup and was simply there. "How do you feel?" he said after a while. "Like I can breathe," she said. He nodded. He understood breathing space in the way of someone who had needed some himself. She looked at him, this man who had reorganized her life so completely from a single collision in a dusty market square, who had shown up beside her every time something needed to be faced, who had stood in front of 6 armed men with nothing in his hands and who had told her he was in love with her with the same directness he used for everything. "The clan will want to formalize things eventually," she said. "Between us." He looked at her steadily. "What does that mean for the clan?" "There is a custom," she said. "An orc bonding custom, not a political ceremony. It's called a holding claim. One person declares the other before witnesses, not ownership. Nothing like that, more of a," she paused, working for the right word, "a declaration of intent, that this is the person you choose, that you will stand for them and they for you." He was quiet for a moment. "Who makes the declaration?" "Traditionally, either party can." She met his eyes. "In Thunderroar custom, the one who was chosen makes it." He looked at her for a long time. "You chose me," he said. "I chose you," she said, "in a market square in Dustfall, and again every day since." He set down his cup. He took her hand in both of his, the big scarred fisherman's hands around her broad green ones, and he said, "Then I should probably make a declaration." She felt the warmth move through her all the way down. "Yes," she said, "you probably should." The holding claim was not a large ceremony. That was one of the things she had always found meaningful about the custom. It was not pageantry. It was a practical and public act done before the people it mattered to. She chose the courtyard on a morning when the highland air was clear and cold, and the sky was the brilliant white blue of autumn at altitude. The clan gathered, not all 1,000, but the council members, the senior warriors, the household, perhaps 60 people, enough to witness. Ezekiel stood before all of them in his plain clothes. He had been offered clan garments and had thanked them and declined, because he was himself and not a symbol, and she loved him for that. And he said, in a voice that was quiet enough that everyone had to pay attention to hear him, "My name is Ezekiel Carver. I came to Dustfall to sell dried fish. I had no house and no clan and nothing to offer except myself. I met Ghorza Thunderroar in a market square, and she looked at me like a person and talked to me like a person, and I have been trying to be worthy of that ever since." He paused. "I'm not a warrior. I don't know your traditions as well as I should yet. I'm learning." He looked at her. "But I know that I choose her, that I will stand beside her. That wherever she is where I intend to be, because she is the clearest and most remarkable thing I have encountered in 30 years of looking." He held her gaze. "I am not a man with much, but I am entirely hers, and that's what I have to give." 60 people were watching, and not one of them spoke, and the silence was not the silence of disapproval but the silence of a room in which something true had just been said. She crossed the courtyard to him. She took his hands and looked at him from the close distance she had come to think of as theirs, and she said to him, and to the clan, and to whatever record of things was kept in the world, "And I am his. Ghorza Thunderroar, heir of this clan, heir of my father's name, who feared nothing and could have gone to anyone chose him. Not his fleet, not his house, not his name, him." She squeezed his hands. "That is the declaration. It is complete." Gorak said from the edge of the courtyard, in a voice that carried exactly the ceremonial weight required without any excess, "The claim is heard. The clan witnesses it." Ezekiel looked at her with those gray eyes that had been the second thing she noticed about him, the steadiness in them, the way they did not flinch at her, and she thought about the first moment she had seen him, carrying that ridiculous crate of dried mackerel, stepping sideways to clear her path, saying sorry before he had finished catching his balance, and she was extraordinarily glad that she had not walked the other way. She kissed him in the courtyard, and the clan cheered, not the polite acknowledgement of a political arrangement but the genuine, warm, slightly rowdy sound of people who were happy for two of their own. Because he was now clan associate, contracted trade representative, man who had stood between their heir and 6 armed strangers. Ezekiel Carver, who had come with nothing but himself, was now theirs. In the weeks that followed, Dustfall became a story told in the market and the great hall, and around the clan's fires. The 3 weeks when the heir had faced down 3 warlords' heralds and the Pale Council's purge-agents, and done it with a human fisherman at her side. The story grew with the telling, as all good stories do. In some versions, Ezekiel had fought the agents single-handedly. In the most dramatic versions, she had challenged Brodak to a formal duel and won. She left the embellishments alone. The true story was good enough. She wrote to the Pale Council's oversight office in Port Ashen, as she had threatened to do, with a full account of the Dustfall agents' conduct. The response, 6 weeks later, was a dry acknowledgement that the agents' conduct would be reviewed, and that the Pale Council's purge mandate had been revised to exclude traveling merchants and their associates. She did not know how much her letter had influenced that revision. She suspected it was one voice among several. She was content with that. The North Range boundary dispute produced no further complications. Dalva's partner, who had tried to renegotiate the grain prices, received a very patient and very firm letter and did not try again. Ezekiel set up a trade operation out of the stronghold's east courtyard, a regular route between the Highland Plateau and the Wagon Road towns, selling clan surplus and bringing back coastal goods that were expensive luxuries this far inland. He was methodical and scrupulously honest about prices, which made him popular with every merchant he dealt with, and he had the particular gift of listening carefully enough to know what people actually needed before they asked for it. He learned orc customs with the same patient, unsentimental attention he brought to everything. Not perfectly, not instantly, but genuinely, asking questions when he did not understand, and not being embarrassed by the asking. She watched him move through her world, and felt the thing that had been tight behind her sternum for so long dissolve completely. Not because everything was resolved, the planes were still complicated, and the warlords would always be restless, and leadership was never done, but because she was no longer doing it alone. In the evenings they sat by the fire in her rooms in the old stone stronghold, high above the plateau, and the wind came off the highland meadows and the fire was warm, and he would tell her things he was learning about the clan's history, or ask about the tracking routes she had memorized as a child, and she would ask about the coast, about what the open sea smelled like at dawn, and he would describe it in the plain, specific language he used for everything, and she would lie against his chest and listen and feel entirely, completely herself. Sometimes he still carried the particular quietness of someone who had been alone a long time and was still getting used to not being alone. She recognized it because she had her own version of it. On those evenings she would reach for his hand, or simply sit close enough that the fact of her presence was unmistakable, and she watched the quietness ease. He did the same for her on the days when the weight of the leadership was heavy, and she came back from a council session with the tight expression that meant she had spent hours being someone she had to prove herself as rather than someone she simply was. They were, she thought, very good for each other. Spring came up from the plains and turned the highland meadows green, and there was a morning when she walked out onto the east parapet before dawn and found him already there. Watching the sunrise come over the plateau in colors she did not have names for amber and rose, and a particular pale green at the very horizon that she had never seen anywhere else. "Good morning," he said, without turning, because he had learned her footstep in the stone corridors. "Good morning," she said, and stood beside him, and they watched the sun come all the way up over the highland plateau, turning the old stone of the stronghold from gray to gold, and neither of them spoke for a long time because the moment did not require it. "I sent a letter to Port Ashen," he said eventually. "About what?" "Formally dissolving my coastal merchant registration and registering instead as a Highland trade associate under Thunderroar clan charter." He glanced at her. It felt like the right paperwork. She looked at him for a moment. "You are very thorough about your documentation. It has come in useful," he said. She laughed, warm and real in the cold morning air, and leaned her head against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her and pulled her close, and the highland wind moved through the meadows below, and the first morning birds began in the rocks above, and it was an entirely ordinary moment, and she held it like something precious. She was the heir of Clan Thunderroar. She had been courted by every warlord's emissary from the Redstone Reaches to the Amber Coast, offered alliances and treaties and titles and political arrangements dressed up as affection. She had turned all of them away. She had been backed into a corner by a man with gold rings and a borrowed authority, and she had stood in a dusty square and talked herself out of it. She had invoked clan protection over a fisherman with a battered wagon and a merchant's charter, because he had stood between her and 6 armed men with nothing but the truth. And this man, this quiet, honest, weathered man who had sold his boat and taken to the road because the sea had gotten lonely, who had come to Dustfall to sell dried fish, and had ended up at her side through 3 weeks of heralds and agents and confrontations, and a 6-day ride through the high plains, this man who had come with nothing but himself, had turned out to be exactly, precisely, irreplaceably what she needed. She pressed her hand flat over his where it rested on her shoulder, and he turned his palm over and held her hand, and she looked out over the plateau that was her home and felt, for the first time in a very long time and perhaps the most complete version of it in her life, that everything she needed was exactly where she was standing. "Cragg's messenger came yesterday," she said, "the formal apology letter." "I know," he said. "Gorak told me." "It was very stiff," she said. "You could practically feel how much he hated writing it." "That's the best kind of apology," Ezekiel said. She smiled into the morning. "The Greyman Alliance wants to open trade talks." "Real ones, no marriage proposal attached." "Good," he said. "I'll need to send a representative to their council in midsummer." He was quiet for a moment. "I know a man with a good trade route and a talent for negotiations," he said. "Reasonable rates." She laughed again. "You'll want something in return." "Dinner company," he said. "That's all." He looked at her. The steady gray eyes in the morning light, the small real smile, the man who had said the true thing when it would have been easier to say the safe thing every time from the moment they had met. "That's everything," he said. She kissed him in the early morning light on the parapet above the highland plateau, while the stronghold slowly woke below them, and the smoke began to rise from the kitchen chimneys, and the clan began its day. And the suitors were gone, and the purge-agents were gone, and the succession crisis had been bent into something she could manage. And the hard bargain that Dustfall had forced had purchased something real. Not just safety, not just political leverage, but a life that was genuinely hers. She had chosen it. She was choosing it now. She would choose it again tomorrow. That, she thought, was more than enough.